Okay, I have a question for you. How does a man die on a public beach, surrounded by people, with his face plastered on every newspaper in the country, and manage to remain completely anonymous for 73 years?
It sounds impossible, doesn't it? In the age of surveillance, digital footprints, and, biometric data, we forget how easy it used to be to just vanish.
But the Somerton man is different.
He is. It wasn't just that he was unknown. It's that he seemed to be actively fighting to stay that way.
Today we are doing a deep dive into the Somerton man. We've got a massive stack of sources here, everything from the original 1948 police coroner reports and the decrypted files from the University of Adelaide to the actual divorce papers of the man we now know he was.
Right. And the goal today isn't just to tell you who he was.
No.
Because the headlines in 2022 gave us the name Carl Webb. That's the what. But these documents, they tell us the why. And honestly, the why is so much more haunting than the Soviet spy theories we've entertained for decades.
It really is. It shifts the genre entirely.
Yeah.
We thought we were reading a John le Carre thriller, complete with codes and poisons, but it turns out we were actually reading a tragic romance.
Or a psychological horror.
Exactly. So let's unpack this. We have to start where it all began. Take us back to the morning of December 1st, 1948. Set the scene for us.
Okay. It's early summer in Adelaide, South Australia, Somerton Beach. It's about 6:30 in the morning.
So sunrise.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The sun is just burning off the mist.
Yeah.
You've got a jeweler named John Bain Lyons taking his morning walk. He looks down at the seawall, and he sees a man.
Just a man on the beach.
Well, that's the thing. Usually, if you see a guy sleeping on the beach in Australia, he's in swim trunks, maybe a towel. It's a relaxed vibe.
Right, it's beach culture.
But this man is in a full suit, a fawn-colored double-breasted coat, a tie with stripes, polished shoes, the works.
Polished shoes on the sand.
On the sand. He's slumped back against the concrete wall, legs crossed at the ankles. He looks relaxed, almost peaceful. And there's a half-smoked cigarette resting on his collar, which is a detail that always gets me.
Because it means he died while smoking it, he just nodded off.
It implies he lost consciousness mid-drag. It just
Yeah.
fell from his mouth and landed right there on his lapel.
Wow.
But when the police get there, the weirdness dial gets turned up to 11. They check his pockets. No wallet, no cash, no ID card, nothing.
And this is the part that launched 1,000 conspiracies, the labels.
The labels, every single name tag in his clothing had been meticulously cut out.
See, that's not an accident. That's an action. That is someone saying, I do not want you to know who I am.
Precisely. And in 1948, with the Cold War just starting to freeze over, I don't want you to know who I am. Usually I meant one thing.
I am a spy. It's the perfect setup. For 73 years, this was Australia's greatest unsolved mystery. It had everything. Uncracked codes, secret pockets, potential poisons, and whispers of Soviet espionage. It was the ultimate Cold War thriller played out in real life.
Until 2022. Because that is when a professor named Derek Abbott and a genealogist named Colleen Fitzpatrick finally cracked the case using a single hair trapped in a plastered death mask.
And what they found completely flipped the script.
Completely.
But before we get to the solution, we have to understand the mystery. We have to understand why the world was so convinced this guy was a spook, because the physical evidence is, well, it's compelling.
It's very compelling.
When the pathologist, Dr. Dwyer, looked at this guy, he didn't see an average Joe, did he?
Not at all. He saw someone in peak physical condition. The autopsy noted he was extremely fit, specifically highlighting his calf muscles.
His calves.
Yeah, they were high and well-developed, like answers. In fact, for years, there was a serious theory that he might have been a ballet dancer.
I've also heard the courier theory, like someone who walked miles every day carrying sensitive documents.
That's another one. Someone used to physical exertion, but not manual labor. His hands were soft. No calluses. He was clean-shaven. His fingernails were scrubbed clean. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine.
Who goes to the beach in polished shoes? It looked like he was dressed for a business meeting, not a nap on the sand.
It suggests a man who cared deeply about appearances, or, and this is maybe more chilling, a man who was putting on a costume for his final act.
Right. But the real red flag for the authorities was the cause of death. Or rather, the lack of one.
The poison angle. The autopsy showed his spleen was enlarged 3 times its normal size, and there was blood in his stomach, which usually just screams poisoning.
But they tested for everything.
Everything. Cyanide, alkaloids, barbiturates. And they found 0. Nothing.
Which led to the terrifying conclusion that he had been killed with something rapid and untraceable.
In the late 1940s, this was the signature of professional assassins. We're talking about substances like digitalis or digoxin.
For those who don't know, what does digitalis actually do?
It's a heart medication derived from the foxglove plant.
Yeah.
I mean, in the right dose, it helps the heart. In a toxic dose, it sends the heart into fibrillation and then stops it cold.
And the kicker.
In 1948, it was notoriously difficult to detect in a standard toxicology screen because it disappears from the blood very, very quickly.
So it's the perfect murder weapon for a spy.
It's the perfect murder weapon, period.
And he'd eaten a pasty just before she died.
He had a Cornish pasty. But the analysis showed the poison wasn't mixed into the food.
Which means...
This implies he either ingested it voluntarily, maybe a pill, or it was administered in a way that bypassed the stomach contents initially. A drink, perhaps.
So you have a fit man dead from an invisible poison with no ID and labels cut out of his clothes. That's already suspicious.
Off the charts suspicious.
But then weeks later, they find his suitcase. And this is where the spy theory really grew legs.
It was found at the Adelaide railway station. It had been checked in on November 30th, the day before the body was found, and the contents were eclectic, to say the least.
Eclectic is a nice way of putting it. It looked like a toolkit for someone living a double life.
It did. There was a stenciling brush, the kind you use for marking cargo on ships.
Okay, so maybe a seaman or someone involved in logistics?
Could be. There was a knife that had been cut down and sharpened, which, looks like a weapon or a specialized tool.
A shiv, basically.
Essentially. And then there was this very specific orange thread.
Barber thread.
Barber thread, yes. It's a waxed linen thread, very strong. And the key thing is, it wasn't sold in Australia at the time. It was distinctive.
And they found that exact thread used to repair the lining of the dead man's trousers.
They did. So we know the suitcase is his, but the clothes in the suitcase, just like the clothes on his body, no labels, except for 3 items.
Yes, 3 items marked with the name Keane or Keen.
Spelled K-E-A-N-E.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you're trying to hide your identity, why leave 3 tags on? The police checked every missing person named T. Keane in the British Empire. Nothing. Not a single hit.
Which led investigators to believe it was a red herring, a deliberate misdirection.
It's classic tradecraft, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you are a spy, you leave a false name to send the cops on a wild goose chase while your team cleans up the safe house. You assume the police will find the suitcase, follow the Keane lead, and hit a dead end. Meanwhile, the real agent has vanished.
And we have to remember the context. 1948, just down the road from Adelaide, is the Woomera rocket range.
That's a huge piece of context. Woomera was a top-secret military testing site, a joint project between the UK and Australia.
What were they testing?
Long-range missiles, cutting-edge stuff for the time. If you were a Soviet spy looking to steal rocket secrets, Adelaide is exactly where you'd be.
So it fits the narrative perfectly. A man with no name, carrying tools that could be used for sabotage or signaling, killed by an undetectable poison near a top-secret military site.
It's almost too perfect.
But the strangest clue was yet to come. It wasn't found until months later when a Professor Cleland re-examined the trousers.
The secret pocket.
This feels straight out of fiction. A tiny fob pocket sewn on the inside of the waistband. It was so well hidden the police missed it the first time.
Just a little pouch, stitched in with that same orange barber thread.
And inside was a tightly rolled scrap of paper.
And on that paper were 2 words. Tamam Shud.
Tamam Shud.
It's Persian. It translates to, it is ended, or finished.
It's from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, right?
Correct. The Rubaiyat is a collection of poetry attributed to the 11th century Persian astronomer and poet Omar Khayyam. But the version that matters here is the Victorian translation by Edward Fitzgerald.
Why that one?
It became incredibly popular in the West in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's all about seizing the day, the fleeting nature of life, and accepting death without fear. It has this kind of fatalistic, romantic vibe.
But the paper had been torn out of a book. It wasn't just written down. It was a jagged scrap.
Exactly. Which meant a book existed somewhere with the last page torn out. So the police started a nationwide hunt for it.
And remarkably, they found it.
It's amazing they did. A man came forward, let's call him Ronald Francis, and said he found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back of his car, which he had left unlocked near Somerton Beach around the time the body was found.
He finds a book in his car, doesn't think much of it until he sees the news about the Tamam Shud slip.
Right. So he checks the book, and the very last page is torn out. The tear matches the scrap in the dead man's pocket perfectly.
This is where the spy theory goes into overdrive.
Completely. Because on the back cover of this book, they found faint pencil markings, Indentations, really, visible under UV light. It looked like a code.
WRGOABBD. It looks like nonsense.
Old gibberish.
Naval intelligence looked at it, the best cryptographers in the Department of Defense looked at it,
I
and
couldn't crack it. Nothing.
so they concluded it was likely a one-time pad.
Yes. For those who don't know, a one-time pad is the holy grail of encryption. The key is generated randomly and used only once. If both the sender and receiver have the same pad, the message is mathematically unbreakable.
So if the Somerton man was using a one-time pad?
It would explain why the best minds in intelligence couldn't read it. It would mean he was a very serious, very professional operative.
So a dead man with a secret pocket, a Persian phrase meaning the end, and an unbreakable code. It's a spy novel.
It is, but there was one more thing on that book cover. Something they could read. A phone number.
And an unlisted phone number.
An unlisted number. It belonged to a nurse living just 400 meters from where the body was found. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though for a long time she was known only as Justin or the nurse.
And when the police interviewed her, she acted strangely.
Very strangely, she denied knowing the man. But when they showed her the plaster bust of his face, the death mask, she looked like she was going to pass out.
She wouldn't look at it. She was terrified.
Her reaction was visceral. It wasn't the reaction of someone looking at a stranger. It was recognition mixed with absolute fear.
So the theory was she was his Ambler. Or maybe a Soviet sleeper agent he was trying to contact.
Right. He arrives in Adelaide, goes to her house, something goes wrong, maybe he's compromised, and he's eliminated. He dies on the beach, staring in the direction of her house.
It's a compelling narrative. It ties everything together, the code, the poison, the proximity. It explains why the government couldn't identify him because he didn't exist in the official records.
And for 73 years, that was the story. We were looking for a super spy. Books were written about it. Documentaries were made.
But then science caught up with history.
It certainly did.
I want to pause on the spy stuff for a second and jump forward to how they actually cracked this. Because for 70 years, people tried. They checked dental records, fingerprints, missing persons reports throughout the entire British Empire. Nothing worked. What changed in 2022?
Two things: technology and tenacity. Enter Professor Derek Abbott from the University of Adelaide. He's been obsessed with this case for over a decade.
Okay.
He managed to get access to the plaster death mask made by the police back in 1949.
This is the bust they made of the dead man's face to help with identification.
Right. And trapped in that plaster for 70-plus years were loose strands of the Somerton man's hair.
Okay, but we've had DNA testing since the 80s. Why couldn't they just test the hair 20 years ago?
This is a crucial distinction. Usually when you see CSI shows, they pull a hair and get a DNA match. But to get a standard nuclear DNA profile, the kind that identifies you specifically, you usually need the root of the hair, the follicle.
That's where all the data is.
That's where the rich genetic data lives. And these hairs didn't have roots. They were just the shafts.
So,
For a long time, mostly. Rootless hair usually only gives you mitochondrial DNA, which traces your mother's line. It's useful, but it's not a unique identifier. It's like saying this car was made by Ford. It doesn't tell you the license plate. It just tells you the manufacturing plant.
so how did Abbott get the license plate?
He used a newer technique called shotgun sequencing. Imagine the DNA in that hair is a shredded phone book.
Okay.
Old technology needed the book to be mostly intact to read it. This new tech takes millions of tiny, shredded fragments and uses an algorithm to digitally stitch them back together until it recognizes the sentences.
That is incredible. So they reconstruct the nuclear DNA from the scraps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once they had that, they didn't just run it through a police database. They used forensic genetic genealogy. This is the same tech they used to catch the Golden State Killer.
Explain that to me like I'm 5. How do you find a man who has no record by looking at other people?
Think of it like GPS triangulation. You upload this reconstructed DNA to a public database like GED Match. You don't find the Somerton man. But you find a third cousin in Melbourne. Then you find a fourth cousin in Canada.
Okay.
These two people don't know each other, but they share a tiny overlapping segment of DNA with your unknown man. So you build their family trees back to the 1800s. You find where those trees intersect,
Common ancestor.
the great-great-grandfather, and then you work forwards in time, listing every single male descendant.
And you're just filtering the list. Okay, this guy died in 1920, can't be him. This guy was in the U.S., can't be him.
Exactly. And eventually, after building a tree with over 4,000 people on it, you are left with one name. A man who was born in the right year, lived in the right place, and crucially, has no death certificate.
And on Saturday, July 23, 2022, they found him.
They found him.
The Somerton man wasn't a Russian spy. He wasn't a mysterious ballet dancer from Europe.
No. His name was Carl Charles Webb. He was 43 years old. He was born in Melbourne. And his profession. He was an electrical engineer and an instrument maker.
An instrument maker. I have to admit, when I first heard that, I was a little disappointed. I wanted the spy story.
I think a lot of people felt the deflation instrument maker sounds so mundane. But this is where I think the story actually gets profound. Because once you strip away the spy thriller fantasy, you're left with a real human being. And the tragedy of Carl Webb is far more haunting than any John le Carre novel.
So let's look at Carl Webb. Who was he really? And how does he explain all those weird clues? Let's start with the Keen labels. If his name was Webb, why was he wearing clothes labeled Keen?
It wasn't a code. It wasn't a fake identity.
Yeah.
Carl Webb had a brother-in-law named Thomas Keen and a nephew named John Keen. John Keen died in World War II.
Oh.
Exactly. The clothes were hand-me-downs.
He was wearing his dead nephew's clothes.
He was. Carl Webb was separated from his wife, likely short on cash. He was wearing hand-me-downs. The reason the police couldn't find a missing T. Keen is because T. Keen wasn't missing. He was already dead and accounted for.
That is. Well, it completely dissolves the mystery into something so domestic, so sad.
And it explains why some tags were left on. He didn't cut them off to hide his identity. He probably cut the others off because they were irritating. Or maybe they had his own name and he did want to be anonymous, but he left the Keen ones because they weren't his name anyway.
Okay, what about the code? The unbreakable Soviet cipher.
Well, we know now that Carl Webb was a huge fan of horse racing. He was a gambler.
Don't tell me.
It's highly probable that those letters, WRGOABD, were mnemonics for horse names.
You're kidding me.
Punters do this all the time. You scribble down the first letters of the horses you want to bet on in a race. Winning round, go on, another big bet, you know.
So naval intelligence spent decades trying to crack a code that was basically a shopping list for the racetrack.
Essentially, yes. And because it's a personal mnemonic, it doesn't follow linguistic rules, which is why it looked unbreakable. It wasn't encrypted. It was just random data points meaningful to one person.
Wow. And the orange thread, the special barber thread that wasn't sold in Australia?
Again, look at it through the lens of his domestic reality. Carl Webb was separated. His wife had left him. He was living alone in a boarding house.
He didn't have anyone to sew his buttons on.
Exactly. He was mending his own clothes. That thread wasn't tradecraft. It was poverty, or at least frugality. It was a man trying to keep up appearances. Remember the suit and the polished shoes while his private life was falling apart.
So the thread was just thread.
It was just a sturdy thread he had in his sewing kit, maybe something he picked up years ago or inherited from his instrument-making supplies.
That is such a tragic reframe. We saw a master of disguise, but really we were looking at a lonely guy trying to fix a rip in his pants with whatever thread he had in his old work kit.
It strips away the glamour, doesn't it? But it replaces the glamour with humanity. We aren't looking at a super spy. We're looking at a man wearing a dead boy's clothes, using work tools to fix them, traveling to a city where he knows nobody, to find a woman who doesn't want to see him.
So why was he in Adelaide? Why die on Somerton Beach? This brings us to the emotional core of the story. The wife.
Dorothy Robinson, known as Doff.
This is where the source material gets heavy. We found divorce papers, right?
We did. And they paint a very, very dark picture of Carl Webb's life. He wasn't just a quiet engineer. He was described as depressed, moody, and arguably abusive.
Abusive how?
Emotionally. Controlling. There's a harrowing account where Dorothy came home and found him in a wet bed gazing into space after he had overdosed on ether.
Ether? That's heavy stuff. That's not something you just have lying around.
No, it is. It suggests he was self-medicating or perhaps attempting suicide long before he ended up on the beach. Dorothy eventually couldn't take it anymore. She left him. She fled Melbourne specifically to get away from him.
And she moved to South Australia.
Exactly. She moved to a town called Butte, and then later her trail leads to the general Adelaide area.
So Carl Webb traveling to Adelaide?
It wasn't a mission of espionage, it was a mission of obsession.
He was stalking her?
He was. He was coming to find his ex-wife.
That chills me more than the spy theory. The idea of this guy unraveling, packing a suitcase with a sharpened knife and a stenciling brush, which I assume he used for work, and getting on a train to track down a woman who didn't want to be found.
It reframes everything. The instrument maker was trying to fix the one thing he couldn't repair, his marriage, or perhaps his own psyche. He had a map in his head of where she might be.
And the poetry. The Rubaiyat. How does that fit in?
Dorothy stated in her affidavits that Carl loved poetry. She said he wrote poems about death and claimed death was his greatest desire.
Wow. So the Tom should slip, that wasn't an instruction?
No, it wasn't a signal to a handler. It was a personal message. It is ended. He tore out those words because they resonated with his state of mind. He was a man obsessed with finality.
So ripping the end out of the book was a dramatic gesture, a suicide note for himself.
Yes, it fits the profile of a melancholic, dramatic personality. He carries it in his secret pocket like a talisman of his own despair.
Which brings us back to the nurse, Jessica Thompson. Why did he have her number on the back of the book?
This is the loose thread that still dangles a bit. But think about it psychologically. If he's tracking his wife, maybe he thought she was staying with Jessica. He might have been looking for leads.
There were rumors they might have had an affair in Sydney years prior, right?
Yes, it's possible. Maybe he went to her for help. Maybe he went to her hoping to find Dorothy. And when he didn't find what he was looking for, or was rejected, that was the final straw.
And her fainting reaction when she saw the bus.
It wasn't fear of the KGB. It was the shock of recognizing a former lover or an acquaintance lying dead on a slab. Imagine the guilt or the sheer horror of realizing the man who maybe knocked on your door or called you is now the famous unknown man.
And she couldn't say anything because she was married, living a respectable life. She didn't want to be dragged into a scandal involving a suicidal stalker from her past.
Precisely. She chose silence to protect her own life, which inadvertently fueled the mystery for 7 decades.
So let's try to reconstruct those final hours. It's November 30th, 1948. Carl Webb arrives in Adelaide.
He arrives by train. He buys a ticket to Henley Beach, but he never uses it.
He changes his mind.
Something changes his mind. Instead, he checks his suitcase into the cloakroom at the station.
He keeps the poetry book. Or maybe he dumps the book in the car before he goes to the beach.
The timeline is fuzzy, but he likely discards the book, perhaps realizing he doesn't need the whole thing, just the Tamam Shud scrap. He finds an unlocked car, a random vehicle, and tosses it in. It's a careless act of a man who doesn't plan to be around to explain it.
He gets on a bus. He goes to Somerton Beach.
He's alone. He's likely failed to find Dorothy, or perhaps he found her and she turned him away. He sits on the sand.
He's wearing a suit. He's shaved. His shoes are polished.
This detail really sticks with me. He cleans himself up. Even at the end, his vanity or his need for order, he's an instrument maker, remember, prevails. He wants to look dignified.
And then the labels.
Yes. We talked about this as tradecraft earlier, but in this context, it feels like a psychological act of negation.
How so?
He cuts his name out of his clothes. He carries no wallet. He wants to disappear. He wants to strip himself of Carl Webb before he dies. He wants to become a nobody.
It's identity suicide.
Exactly. He is erasing himself from the world, piece by piece.
And then the poison, likely digoxin or digitalis.
It fits the medical evidence perfectly. It causes the heart to stop. It was undetectable in 1948. Maybe he had access to it through his work with chemicals or instruments, or perhaps he acquired it specifically for this.
He eats a pasty. He smokes half a cigarette. And as the sun goes down, he slumps against the seawall.
And he dies not for a cause, not for government, but because of a broken heart and a broken mind.
We have to talk about the end, the final moments. Because even with the DNA, we don't know exactly why he went to Somerton Beach that night.
We can make a very educated guess, though. He came to Adelaide to find his ex-wife, Dorothy. We know she had moved to the region. We know he was obsessed with her.
And since he was found dead the next morning, we have to assume he either didn't find her.
Or he did. And she rejected him. That final rejection was the last piece.
And that leads to the Tamam Shud slip. It is ended.
He tore that scrap out of the book. He rolled it up and hid it in that tiny fob pocket. It wasn't a code for a handler. It was a note to himself, a final affirmation that this was it.
And here's the detail from the research that really stuck with me. It's in the divorce deposition. Dorothy is describing Carl's behavior during their marriage. She says he was moody, depressed, but she specifically describes coming home and finding him lying in bed, fully awake.
Gazing into space.
Gazing into space. That phrasing is so specific.
It is. Now, fast forward to December 1st, 1948. The coroner's report describes the body. He's slumped against the wall. His head is resting back on the concrete. And his eyes, they aren't closed.
They were open.
They were open. He's looking up at the sky.
So the very last thing Carl Webb did was exactly what his wife had described. He was just gazing into space.
I think there's a profound and tragic poetry there. He spent his life being an instrument maker, trying to control things, measure things, fix things. But in the end, he couldn't fix his marriage. He couldn't fix his mind. So he went to the edge of the continent, stared at the stars, and just let go.
It makes you wonder. We spent 73 years trying to solve a puzzle. We treated him like a crossword clue. But he was a person, a deeply troubled person.
And maybe that's the lesson here. We love the mystery because it's a puzzle we can solve. The reality, mental illness, loneliness, heartbreak, those are problems we can't always solve so neatly. So we prefer the spy story. It's cleaner.
It's more exciting.
And less
Real.
But you know, there's a massive irony here that I can't shake.
What's that?
He tried so hard to be anonymous. He cut the labels. He dumped the ID. He wanted to vanish without a trace.
He did everything he could to be forgotten.
But by doing that, he became the most famous unnamed man in Australian history. You're right. If he had left his wallet in his pocket, he would have been a two-line obituary in the Melbourne Argus. Carl Webb, found deceased. Forgotten in a week.
But because he erased himself, we're still talking about him 75 years later. His final act had the exact opposite effect he intended.
The ultimate paradox.
Well, Carl Webb, you aren't a mystery anymore. You're history. And now you're known.
Tamam Shud.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time. Stay curious.